In the book, you pretty much one of the first examples you actually give of tactical performance, which in 2016, it's not something that maybe people would actually look at this way, but it very much, when you look at it, it's very clearly is an example of that. You actually use the civil rights movement and the lunch counter protests as an example of that. And so, talk a bit about that. And I also want to go a little bit into how you discuss the training that those activists went through and how important that actually was to their actual action and making it very successful.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. These actions of the civil rights movement, the sit-ins, it's only one thing of thousands of things that they did,
Right.
but I think it really stands out as an example of this kind of work. First of all, the civil rights movement was very savvy and very theoretically, complex in the way that they theorized what they were doing. So they talked about these kinds of interventions as sociodrama. And they said, we're going to create a sociodrama now in the Woolworths, in the racist, segregated lunch counters. And in order to do that, they didn't just, there were some spontaneous sit-ins, of course, but the ones that were part of the movement and people who had trained for it, they really, like behind the scenes, they role played both sides. They would take their turns playing themselves, sitting down, and then their friend or colleague would role play a racist mob, or people in a racist mob, attacking them, yelling at them, blowing smoke in their face, and doing all these things. And essentially, they were rehearsing for this radical action backstage. So when they came on stage, onto the world stage, and sat down and did this electrifying action, and then had to endure this kind of abuse, they had the discipline. Congressman John Lewis, who just recently did a sit-in for gun control on the floor of Congress, was one of these activists doing a similar type action. I read his memoirs, and he made the point. He said, when I was being attacked, when I was being physically abused while doing these creative nonviolent actions, it was not as frightening as I thought it would be because I had rehearsed it. I was prepared. I knew what they were going to do. And I think there's something there to us when we're facing a situation where the opponent simply has more force or has the monopoly of power in a lot of more conventional ways. They also can become predictable because what they do works all the time. But that means that they're kind of a predictable actor. And if you know what they are doing, you can use a tactical performance like rehearsal process to create a sociodrama where the other side's going to do exactly what you know they're going to do, but you've prepared so that you're one step ahead, and you've created a drama where as soon as they step into it, they're in your scene, and they're playing the bad guys in your scene for the world stage. And this is what happened with most of these sit-ins. I kind of broke it down into a 3-act structure. Act 1, the people sit down, and they're totally dignified. They had signed discipline statements saying exactly what they would do and what they wouldn't do. So everyone was really disciplined, and what costumes they would wear, what props they would carry, by which I mean books and very nice clothing, and their affect, how they were going to engage with people, was very strictly controlled and regulated by themselves in rehearsal. And then an unruly racist mob starts to harass them or even attack them. That's Act 2. That's bad enough. But Act 3, of course, again, predicted by them, they know. The police show up and arrest the wrong people, and they arrest the people who've been being attacked by a mob, not the attackers. Now, if you lived in those states, you knew that would happen. But having created this spectacle of racist cruelty was galvanizing and surprising for other people in the world who hadn't engaged, and that led to this great outcry and leverage. This was not the only action of its type, of course, but it was one of the most famous ones, where it literally leveraged pressure from other countries on the president of the United States, who didn't really want to do anything or get involved necessarily. He had other priorities, but he's getting calls from like state leaders in Britain and France saying, you're making our side in the Cold War look bad by allowing this to happen.
Right.
So these folks who had very few resources in terms of money and power and legal rights created these, as they said, sociodramas. They called it creative suffering as well, which I think is a very powerful concept. Creative suffering. And they actually were able to leverage geopolitical power on this huge level, which did trigger federal intervention, And so I think that's such a classic example that it's humbling for us when we're doing relatively smaller, safer, and even sillier actions. But I think that they're sort of as an ancestor, in this tradition, just thinking about the basic principles of creating a sociodrama, using your opponent's predictability against them, thinking one step ahead, being surprising. And in their case, we don't always do this, but the idea of saying, we're going to have discipline over our own emotions so that we can have more impact over the emotions of others. They were totally not responding in predictable ways to being abused, right? They kept to their script much in the way that the Gandhian movement that they had studied did. And thereby, this doesn't work in every political context, and it's not the only way to engage, first of all. I don't want to only make it like that.
Diversity of tactics.
Yeah, diversity of tactics is important, and to understand some people are not in a position to do these things, et cetera. But it's such a strong example of this type. That's why I wanted to spend some time on it,
Well, it's also a really good example of how, and I think kind of, not activists certainly, but a lot of Americans sort of want to look back at the civil rights era, and it's like, oh, things were bad. Martin Luther King gave a speech, and then racism ended, where in reality, these were like amazing organizers who thought out all these, different aspects of how are these responses going to happen. This was so much thought and work and planning went into so many aspects of what they did that doesn't, like on MLK Day, they'll play a speech, and it's like, oh, okay, but that was it. No, it was so much more on so many different levels, and just the brilliance and thought that went into so much of it. It just goes. It's not, obviously some people talk about it, but the majority of people don't actually talk about it when we're actually talking about the history here.
It would be great if MLK was also called, Creative Civil Disobedience Day.
Yeah, totally.
Wouldn't that, just to honor all those thousands and thousands of people, and Dr. King was brilliant and he was super important, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't agree with you more. There's just thousands and thousands of people who really sacrificed both and had amazing ideas about how to do these campaigns, and then did them at great risk to themselves, and many lost their lives. It would be great if we acknowledge the collective history a bit more. I know it goes against some of our traditions here, not to celebrate just the big individual, but it really it would be so much better.